Who are the wealthy and how do they get rich? You may have seen many studies about this, but I've seen the full finances of thousands of Canadians. And I've read many of the studies. So this is based on both the studies and but most of it is actually based on my personal experience. Now, I'll be the first one to admit that our clients aren't representative of the public. They're generally higher income. They're generally much more growth focused. They're working from a financial plan. So, however, I've talked with so many people on the blog and in person, and I know lots of wealthy people, so I have a very good idea of who these people are and how they got there. So, what we're going to learn today is how much do you need to be wealthy? Why are the media stories about the wealthy and poor wrong? Why are people with high incomes different from people with high net worth? Is high income important to become wealthy? What types of households have low or high incomes? Do the wealthy mostly inherit it? What types of people have high net worth? What does the life cycle investing tell us about growth investing, the study? And how can you become wealthy? Okay, so first of all, how much do you need to become wealthy? So basically the way I define wealthy is that you've got investments that will provide you with more than your desired lifestyle if you choose to not work. So you need a retirement or a financial independence goal, and if you have more than that, so you don't have to work, but it's not like you're just there, like you're way ahead. That's what makes you wealthy. Now, usually we say, being 20% ahead of your goal is a margin of safety. So let's say that wealthy is 50% of your goal or more. That's arbitrary, but that's a reasonable rule of thumb. So it's enough you don't have to worry about money. So now from experience, for most people, that's 2.5 to 5 million. Some people more, some people less, but that's kind of the type of number, which may sound like a lot, but you can build that over time. Investments compound. That's how you can get there. So now, the investments need to be productive growth assets. So, a productive growth asset is something with a good return that's reliable over the long term, compounding for decades, and assets that you will use for your lifestyle in the future. So, the best of these, of course, is the stock market equity investments. So, but if you take the top 20% of net worth, very often most of it is in their house. I think that's probably true for probably just under half of them, that most of their net worth is in their home. Now, that your house is not a productive asset. It's a personal use asset unless you will use it for your retirement income in some way. Okay. So you could sell and downsize to a much lower cost home, or you could sell and rent. You could borrow against it to invest, like we've had people doing this Smith River strategy where you're investing from your equity, or you could borrow against it to spend. Now, if you're going to do one of those, it becomes a productive asset. But if you're just going to sit on a paid off house, then it's not a productive asset. It's a personal use asset. So it doesn't count in being wealthy. So, at least in my books. So now, why are the media stories about the wealthy and poor wrong? You've probably seen lots of stories in the media about the top 20 or the bottom 20% and 10% or 1%, and what are they doing? Now, the problem with all these, there's a few problems, but the biggest one is they're about income, not wealth. So wealth is having a high net worth. Okay, so being wealthy means a high net worth, not high income. So, now, the statistics you see, often the income statistics are quite questionable. They're often salary and wages only. We get those from Stats Canada often, but they just show salaries and wages, and that often excludes, so government programs for low income people. For low income people, it excludes the welfare, the EI that they're getting, or whatever supports they're getting. It excludes investment income for high income people, which is often a big number, and also it excludes the income tax that's mostly paid by the high income people. So you think the people with a high income have, if you have twice as much income, you get twice as much to spend. Not nearly true, because twice as much income, you're paying a lot more income tax. So your take home is less. Now, income stats are usually for households where the lowest 20% are often a single person, while the highest 20% is usually a couple. So, the income stats often compare households with a single person and a couple, which aren't really comparisons at all. So now net worth official statistics are also questionable. So because many assets are hard to value. So, they can approximate a home value and maybe investments that are, that are measurable, you get statements for. But but it's hard to measure, a business. In fact, even if you're a business owner, you often really don't know what your business is worth till you sell it. You may have properties overseas. You've got investments maybe that are not in your name; they're in a corporation or a trust. And so, a lot of times, net worth stats are not that are quite questionable as well. So now statistics are usually averages as well, and that's why sometimes when you look at stats on they show you about people, and sometimes they seem confusing. They seem really is that not what it's like, and sometimes it's that way because it's showing a weird average. Okay, and averages often don't reflect the actual people. So for example, let's say we have take two very large low income groups. Okay, one is students that have a net worth of zero, and seniors that have a net worth of 1 million because they have a paid off home. Okay. Now, both of these are very low income, and you average them out and you have an average net worth of 500,000, but none of those people have have a net worth around 500,000. No one's even close to that number. So the averages can often really kind of skew things. Now, why are people with high incomes different from people with high net worth? So now I'll give you a simple example of the difference of this. So, which one do you think is wealthy? I'll give you two couples. Who is wealthy? So the first one, it's a couple that earns 200,000 a year with a net worth of zero. Second one is a couple that earns 30,000 a year, but has a net worth of 1.5 million. Now, you may think those are odd, but they're both very large groups. So the first group, 200,000 a year, net worth of zero, that's very often true of, recent university grads, especially if they got student loans. They got no net worth yet, but they could have a very high income, if they got a useful degree. Couples earning 30,000, that's super common. These are seniors, with a paid off home. I actually have a video about what I call millionaires in poverty. So these are people that have a net worth of 1 or 2 million or more. In Toronto here we have tons of these people. Their house is paid off, and often they have very little and other investments. So they're millionaires, but they're living on 20 or 30,000 a year, just the government income. So now, 75% of seniors own a home, and most of them are paid off. So a lot of these people are the wealthy, but they're also the low income. So the point here is that high net worth seniors are the wealthy, but studies usually focus on the low net worth recent grads with the highest 20% income. So they show these grads as high income, but they're not the wealthy. The wealthy are these seniors with low income. So, is a high income important to become wealthy? In reality, here, it's what you save, not what you make. I've seen people that make 300,000 and spend all of it. I've seen people that make 40,000 a year and save 20,000 of it. Now, you may seem ridiculous. I've seen that by a single person living in Toronto. So, but it's always what you save that matters, not what you make. Of course, it is much easier to save if you have a high income, and generally there is a correlation. So, it's important to, if you really want to get wealthy, it's a good idea to have a high income, and to do that, you need a productive profession or skills. So it's a lot easier that way. So now, income for the top 20%, in these stats of Canadians typically show, income about 150,000 or more. And, if you have a household with an income of 150,000 and you live in Toronto, that's actually not a lot. You're not wealthy with that. So depends a lot on the cost of living where you are living. So now I got a chart here. It shows the higher net worth people tend to have higher income. So generally it is true, but I can tell you there's a ton of exceptions. So, and the biggest one often is doctors, because they're widely known to have the lowest net worth based on their income. So, and doctors often tend to think they should live the doctor's high lifestyle, and they spend much of their money. So again, it's a matter of what you keep, not what you make. What types of households have low or high incomes? Okay, so first of all, I'm talking about households, not people. So so people with low incomes or that are not working at all or only part time are very often in a high income household. See that a lot. You have two people, one with a high income, one with a low income or not working much. So, but we're talking households. Okay, now the general rule of thumb, this you may find shocking, but the top and the middle and the bottom 20%, for the most part, are the same people at different times in their life. Okay. There's a perception that the poor are always poor, and there are quite a fair number of them, but that's actually not the majority of them. And that the rich are always rich, again, not necessarily the majority. So only a small percent of people stay in their income group most of their life. Most people move up and down. So now, who are they? The bottom 20%, income below 30,000. Okay, the ones that I see are mostly students and seniors. I realize there are some low income people that generally wouldn't come to us, but now Stats Canada says that students and seniors are the most likely groups to be in the bottom 20%. So now, quite often, it's single people and not working full time. So now the interesting thing is, so if you're a single person and making minimum wage but working full time, you're making about 34,000 a year. So you're not even in the bottom 20%. So the bottom 20%, for the most part, is it's households where the one or two people collectively work less than full time, less than one person full time. Now, the second lowest group, this is people between 30 and 55,000. 20, these are mostly people in the 20s and 30s or early in their career. So that, they got their starter, you get your starter job, or it could be the same low income people from before, except that now they have a partner. So now the middle 20%, income between 55 and 90,000. These are generally people in their 30s and 40s, but they could be early in your career or mid-career. They've got their incomes are higher. And it could be, believe it or not, you could be in the middle group. You could be a minimum wage couple with both working full time. You're in the middle group. You're not even one of the two lowest groups. Now, the second highest group is a pretty wider group from 90,000 to 150,000. That's often in the same people that we had earlier, except now they're older. They're 50s and 60s. They're late in their career, so they got been getting raises over the years. They're getting promotions. They may have changed jobs to get higher income. So a lot of these are people that start off low, and now they're making higher income later on in their career. Now, the top 20% is a little different because this is incomes over 150,000. Now, remember, a household over 150,000 could be two people making 75,000 each. So there's not necessarily high profession, but most of the people in the highest income, especially the highest 10 or 5%, they tend to be people with valuable skills and professions. So professionals, often, especially, doctors and engineers, I find are often the ones with really high incomes. A lot of IT specialists, a lot of salespeople can make a lot of money, and there's also a lot of business owners, and all these people could be any age between 30 and 65 or even more. So they have people with productive degrees in the STEM fields, or they could be tradespeople with a small business. I've seen, a plumber. If you're a plumber with six plumbers working for you, you're making more money than a doctor. So but basically you have valuable skills and professions. Those are the people that are earning the big bucks. So now the other part that's part of the big top 20% is many people are there with 1 year of high income. So a significant percentage of people are in the top 20% for only 1 or 2 years. In fact, some studies show that most of the people, like if you go not just 20%, but if you go in the top 1%, most of them are only there for 1 or 2 years. And very often it's you sell a rental property or you sell a business or you get a big severance and you have a 1 year where you have a really big income and wow, you're part of the rich this year. But it's only because, you sold a rental property and you made a big capital gain once. I've seen lots of, carpenters make 50,000 a year for 40 years, but they sell a rental property and they make, 500,000 or million profit in a rental property that they've owned for 40 years. And that year they're in the highest income group, but they've never really earned a lot of money. So now seniors, generally you're back down to the lowest or the second lowest 20% again. So you're usually one of the lowest two groups. So now most Canadians don't save nearly enough to retire comfortably. Well, they could well earn more. Like if people saved up, they could be making a lot more, but most of them don't, and they tend to be back in the lowest income. Now, the other part of it is seniors often have a fair amount of income that's not taxed or taxed at low rates. They have money in the TFSA, they have non-registered investments. So we have a fair number of clients that have tax deductions, like from Smith River or something. So what's happening is the official stats are all based on taxable income, okay, or earned income, and they miss all this other income that people have. So often they show in the lowest income, but their actual income, their actual cash income might be higher. Now, do the wealthy mostly inherit it? Okay, the answer to that is no. Very few people actually inherited their wealth. In fact, most of the millionaires and even the billionaires, if you can believe it, made it all themselves. I'll give you lots of examples. Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Page, and Sergey Brin is from Google, Jeff Bezos from Amazon. They basically made the money by themselves. So they may have inherit a little bit, but basically they made almost all their money by themselves. Now, I took one year, I went through the Forbes 400 richest people, and I counted because they tell you where they got their money from. And what I saw was 13% inherited it, 87% made it themselves. So, almost all the wealthy people make it themselves. And, the classic story, I don't know if you ever heard this, but the classic story for the people that build up the big businesses is the first generation makes up a big business, becomes very wealthy. The second generation managed to maintain it. Third generation loses it. We in Canada here, we had the Eaton family that was kind of like that. And that is the classic story, and it just happens a lot. So interestingly is I met a guy a couple of years ago. So he was the grandson of the owner of a huge business with a household name. So his grandfather had been very wealthy or owned a very big business, years ago. So now this grandson is moving in with a roommate out west because he cannot afford his rent in Toronto. Now, his grandfather was actually sounds odd. Like his grandfather was super rich. Why is he renting and why can't he afford it? So now his grandfather, what happened is he told me about this. So his grandfather had a partner and each of them had a bunch of kids. So the estate got, divided a whole bunch of ways. And for him, he didn't earn a lot of money. Cost of living is high and he actually spent most of it. And so here he is, the grandson of this super wealthy guy, and he has actually not much money. So, and you know what? This is the norm. This is, you don't really see a lot of this. So now, most inheritances that I see are received when people are in their 60s or 70s. It's not that you get it when you're young and build it. It's when you're older that you actually get the money. So now the stats show like people live much longer than you think. So 50% of couples, one reaches the age of 94. Now, generally, most inheritances are only after the second parent dies. So your second parent dies and it is 94, 95. How old are you at the time when you get your inheritance? So it's not necessarily something that you can count on. Most people want to enjoy their wealth and leave a bit for their kids. We've done lots of plans for people. Very few of them plan for huge intergenerational wealth. There are some that want that and that specifically want to leave a large inheritance, but it's actually a pretty minor percentage. Most people want to they built it up. They're going to enjoy life. And you know what? They give their kids enough to get started, but um, the parents are going to enjoy the life. That's what I find with most people. So now Warren Buffett, who could leave any amount, his advice is, he says, I will leave my kids enough so they can do anything, but not enough so they can do nothing. And I think that's very smart. Like he actually considers it un-American to give a large inheritance to your kids because then they never actually learn to build up their own money. And they often rich people's kids can be quite useless people because they just inherit money and never really do much in their life. Now, what types of people have a high net worth? Now, I've got a chart here where you see generally wealth builds with age. So for the most part, the older you get, the wealthier you get. Once you're retired, you're starting to slowly spend it off. But for the most part, it's just the older you get, the wealthier you get. So the wealthy are mostly older people, let's say 50 plus, who saved and invested over the years. That's basically who they are. Now, the income also tends to rise with age, but retirees are often mostly low income, but are still high net worth. So that's a big difference between income and net worth. Income rises by age, but then falls off when you retire. Net worth builds up and usually still pretty high when you retire. And actually, you'd think when you're retired, you're building it up. But I can tell you from lots of financial plans. So if you build up money to retire and then let's say you try to maintain the same lifestyle if you retire, what you see is your income starts off slow and you get this exponential curve that it builds up. And then after you retire, you're withdrawing from it, and it's increasing by inflation. And what happens is your investments actually rise for a while and fall. And if you're at zero age 100, you're usually the highest point is not when you retire at 65, but it's around age 85 or something. So it actually rises, but then you take more and more money, and once it starts falling, it falls off quickly. So that's why you'd see retirees very often they're not cutting into their capital that fast until later on in their retirement. Now, investors, especially growth investors, are also the wealthy. So the biggest one, the stock market, which is equity, we call them equity investors or the stock market. It's business owners, and it's investors in leveraged real estate. So people with real estate tend to make a lot of money if they have a large mortgage and keep a large mortgage, but not otherwise. So now equities, which are the stock market or businesses, equities are the highest growth asset class, the highest growth. So, and equities can be, equity investors and business owners are both investing in businesses. So it's kind of it's a version of the same thing. Now, I got a chart here that shows the example of wealth built over 40 years. Let's say from age 25 to 65, you build up wealth. And I've compared stocks versus fixed income versus real estate. And I took 52,800, which was the average house price in Toronto in 1974, 40 years ago. Okay. And if you had that in real estate, if you had it in your home, that home with 52,000 is worth just over $1 million now. If you're in fixed income, it's worth about 825,000. But if you're in global stocks, it's worth about 10 million. So to see the growth in stocks is just many times higher than other asset classes over time. But you have to know how to do it, how to stay invested and invest effectively. So the highest net worth people usually did significant borrowing to invest. That's the other thing that I've seen. Nearly all of if you look at the very wealthy people, nearly all of them borrowed to invest in investments or in business. Now we've got clients that get there from doing the Smith maneuver or investment loans, like 3-for-1 investment loans or something. They're borrowing to invest. A lot of businesses, if they end up getting loans to support their businesses, and businesses can grow very quickly. And real estate, if you have a huge mortgage and keep a huge mortgage, can be a decent investment. Even though I just show you the growth can be a lot lower, but it's leveraged when you use real estate. And some people feel more comfortable, borrowing against real estate than borrowing against the stock market, even though both of them work fine, over the long term. Now I got a couple charts here that just show you the difference. I want to show you the difference that borrowing to invest makes. And this is why it is that, the really wealthy people almost all borrow to invest. And just use this as an example. But let's say you invest 4,167 a month. That's 50,000 a year for 30 years. You're making, 8% a year. Your money grows to about 5.8 million bucks. That's pretty good, right? You've done that much. Now, but let's say instead of that, you borrow $1 million to invest. Your interest payment is 5%. So you're paying 4,167 a month. So your cash flow is the same. Okay. And now it's assuming you're in a 30% tax bracket. What happens is your investments now are almost 21 million after 30 years. So the investments are 4 times higher, even though you have the same cash flow. Okay. So that's the difference when you use leverage over the long term. And yeah, it's, if things grow exponentially, you have to give it this, long term to have the exponential growth curve. Now, what does the life cycle investing study tell us about growing wealth? So there's a study by 2 Yale professors that they wrote a book called Life Cycle Investing, and it's a thing you can't do literally, but it's a very interesting concept. Okay, so it's about saving for retirement the same way you buy your home. So the idea is you instead of just saving up 1,000 a month for 40 years, you borrow a huge amount when you're young, and then you pay it off by the mid 50s, and then move towards your target asset allocation by retirement. That's kind of their recommendation. What if you did that instead? And their study showed that in the last 150 years, you would be better off 100% of the time doing that than the normal bit by bit savings. And there's 2 main reasons for this. One is because you start with a lot of money that compounds over time. That's the growth side. The risk side is that The way most people do it, investing bit by bit, you end up with what they call last decade risk. Decade risk. So if you invest for 40 years, let's say from age 25 to 65, and your investment returns are low in the last decade, so from age 55 to 65, the last 10 years, your returns are quite low, then your 40-year return is going to be low. What you made when you're young is actually hardly matters at all because nearly all of your investments are held in the last decade. So the rate of return for the first decade, from when you're 25, age 25 to 35, it's almost irrelevant because you had hardly any investments at that point. So, you have this last decade risk, and that's is often a problem when you invest, the normal bit by bit. So the conclusion here is when you are young, having investments is what matters much more than your rate of return. So to build wealth, try to get as much money invested as, you know, as early as possible when you are young and let it grow for 40 years. Even if you have to borrow to get it, that's, the kind of the secret to building wealth. And that's how the really wealthy got there. Now, note borrowing to invest is not for everyone. It's really only for growth focused people that want to focus on being wealthy and who will stay invested for the long term. So I always say it's a great strategy. It is the best strategy for people if it's done the right way by the right people over the long term. Now, finally, so how could you become wealthy? So, based on what do we learn from all this? Here's kind of 4 steps. One is wealth builds with age. So, invest as much as possible when you're young and let it build. Number 2, save and invest early. So, remember, it's what you keep, not what you make. So, start investing early and just benefit from this 40 years of compounding. Number 3, invest in equities like stock market investments. That's the highest growth asset strategy, or have your own business, or real estate where you have a large mortgage and always keep a large mortgage. Those are the effective investments, the productive investments. And number 4, if it's the right strategy for you, borrow to invest, leverage into equities. This is the most effective growth strategy if done by the right people in the right way over the long term. So, and this life cycle investing is a great example of how this can work, really well over the decades. So thanks a lot for listening. So my name is Ed Rempel. My blog is Unconventional Wisdom. It's just edrempel.com. It's the #1 blog in Canada for a full service financial planner. It's just edrempel.com. I also have a podcast at YouTube. YouTube is edrempel.com/watch. Podcast is edrempel.com/listen. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next week.